The heat hit hard the moment she stepped off the transport van. Out in the desert, the air shimmered above cracked pavement and razor wire fences. A row of watchtowers lined the base perimeter, each one watching, but none of them seeing her. She moved quietly, a slim woman in a plain gray uniform with no rank, no name, no story that anyone cared to ask about. People glanced at her, then looked away, already sorting her into a mental box marked logistics. Nobody wondered where she came from, what she might know, or why someone like her had been cleared to enter Redridge Air Base. Claire Dawson walked the same path every day, her boots silent on concrete, her clipboard tucked close. No one greeted her. Most didn't even notice her. To them, she was background noise, part of the supply chain, someone who scanned crates and sorted gear. But every day she watched. Every day she listened. In the shadows of the simulation hangars behind tinted glass on the edge of loud briefings where no one called her name, she took it all in. The voices, the failures, the friction of a place run by confidence but not always competence. Then the storm came. Not just the wind and the red dust that swallowed the sky, but the kind of storm that unravels systems, alarms, panic, an urgent mission. 2 pilots down, a base full of cadets too afraid to act, no one willing to fly. And in that silence in the center of a room buzzing with fear, she stepped forward. Not loudly, not with drama, just enough to be heard. I can fly it. Heads turned, expressions twisting in disbelief. Some laughed. Others stared like they'd just noticed her for the first time. But she didn't blink. She stood with calm certainty, her voice steady, her purpose clear. She wasn't just someone who sorted cargo. She was something else entirely. And in that moment, the woman they had ignored became the only one who could save them. Claire Dawson arrived at Redridge Air Base without a ceremony, a file, or a handshake. The transport dropped her at the southern gate just after dawn, where desert winds pushed fine grit into every crease of fabric. She stepped out quietly, tugging the strap of a worn canvas bag higher on her shoulder, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Her uniform was the same muted gray issued to civilian contractors. No patches, no bars, no name. Just standard, unassuming material that clung to her like it had been washed too many times. She wore scuffed work boots and carried a digital clearance card that beeped at the gate with reluctant approval. No one asked her where she was from. The intake officer barely looked up before waving her toward the logistics building. Inside, she was told to report to inventory control, where boxes were labeled, scanned, and moved across tarmac. Nothing exciting, nothing prestigious. Just paper trails and supply manifests. At 38, Claire moved like someone who had nothing to prove. Her posture was straight, her pace steady, her tone quiet but never uncertain. She listened more than she spoke, took notes in a small black notebook, and followed orders without friction. She didn't smile often, but she wasn't cold. She simply seemed to carry her own weather. People didn't dislike her. They dismissed her. She wasn't part of the inner circle of cadets or instructors. She didn't hang around break rooms or laugh at inside jokes. When she walked into a space, conversations didn't pause. They just continued without her. She ate alone in the mess hall, always at the same seat near the wall. Her tray was minimal and untouched more often than not. No one sat across from her. If someone made a snide comment about the way she dressed or how quiet she was, she didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't even seem to hear it. There was a stillness about her that unnerved some of the younger cadets, like she knew something they didn't, like she had seen more than she let on. But they brushed it off. In their world, experience wore flight suits and medals, not faded uniforms and second-hand boots. Sometimes they whispered about her. Maybe she was a technician who got demoted. Maybe she was someone's cousin here because of a favor. Maybe she didn't know what she was doing. But no one bothered to ask. They just kept their distance, content to let her drift along the edges of their structured, high-pressure world. The officers who passed her in corridors gave her the same glance they gave shipping crates. She was just another component in a much larger operation. Not invisible, but irrelevant. One more civilian doing back-end support work so real missions could happen. But Claire never looked like she felt small. She didn't walk with hesitation. Her hands were always steady. Her eyes moved constantly, tracking equipment schedules and personnel rotations with quiet attention. If she noticed the dismissiveness, she didn't show it. She operated as though her worth had already been decided by something deeper than public approval. She rarely interacted with others outside the bare minimum. A nod here, a signed form, there. She didn't push to be included, didn't seem to mind being overlooked. Some mistook that for submission. Others later would recognize it for what it truly was: discipline. There was a grace in how she moved through the base. Not polished, not flashy, just quiet precision. Every motion had intent, every routine repetition, nothing wasted, nothing out of place. Her locker in the unassigned personnel wing was the only one with a taped map inside. Each route through the base marked with highlighter. Each corridor maintenance tunnel and checkpoint accounted for. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. She kept to her schedule, stayed out of trouble, and never asked for more than what she was given. But there was something else too. A calm that came not from detachment but from control. She wasn't floating. She was grounded, fully aware, fully present, and somehow entirely underestimated. Nobody saw her as a threat. Nobody saw her as essential. But Claire didn't need them to. She had never needed that. All she needed was time. And she had plenty. Red Ridge Air Base looked more like the set of a high-budget sci-fi movie than a military facility. Everything gleamed. The walls, the floors, even the air seemed polished. Holographic briefings flickered on glass panels, drones hummed overhead, and biometric locks beeped open to the right fingerprints. The cadets here were young, polished, and sharp. Sons of generals, daughters of defense contractors. They wore crisp flight suits tailored to fit and spoke in acronyms like a second language. Their boots never had dust, and their haircuts never missed regulation. They moved in groups confident and loud. Classrooms doubled as virtual command centers. Training programs included real-time combat simulations with live metrics. Screens stretched wall to wall showing aircraft diagnostics and wind shear models. Instructors wore medals even in simulation zones. Cadets stood when they entered not out of fear, but habit. Hierarchy wasn't just a concept at Red Ridge, it was a design feature. Every inch of the place reminded you where you stood. Offices for command staff overlooked the training yards. Elevators scanned rank before allowing access. Cafeteria lines split between officers and everyone else. Claire didn't belong. Her uniform didn't carry rank stripes. Her boots didn't match. Her badge scanned yellow instead of blue. She moved through security lines without anyone saying her name. No one looked twice. No one cared. To most people there, she was just a clerk. A person who printed supply labels and logged fuel usage. A body assigned to a building. Someone who didn't need to be remembered. She ate her meals late to avoid crowds and walked along the edges of the courtyard when crossing between hangars. If she sat near others, the conversation dipped. Not because of malice, but because she didn't register. She wasn't part of the program. She didn't come from the right school or wear the right emblem. In a place obsessed with excellence, she looked like a mistake that hadn't been corrected yet. There was a rhythm to Red Ridge. Morning drills, midday tests, late-night simulations. Cadets rotated through equipment checks and command scenarios always in sync. They shared jokes only insiders would get, compared performance scores, and studied flight logs like gospel. They trained to be leaders, not followers. Claire watched them from corners of rooms, quiet and uninvited. Sometimes she'd pause just long enough to catch a detail others missed. A cadet rushing through pre-check. A shift supervisor skipping procedure. But she never said a word. That wasn't her place. Not in their eyes. The air at Red Ridge wasn't hostile. It was indifferent. The kind that freezes before it burns. Everyone had a goal, a schedule, a standard to meet. There wasn't time to wonder why a quiet woman with no rank kept showing up in places just outside the action. To them, she was background. Useful when needed, invisible when not. In a facility built for the best of the best, she didn't exist. But that was the thing about Red Ridge. It only measured what it could see. And Claire Dawson wasn't here to be seen. She was here to see everything. It happened in the corridor outside the simulator dome, the one with the polished floors and perfect acoustics. Claire had just finished scanning crates and was headed back to logistics when she crossed paths with a group of cadets clustered around Brandon Keller. He stood in the middle like he always did, sharp uniform, smug grin, the kind of confidence that came from knowing no one would ever call him out. He saw her and didn't move aside. Neither did the others. She stopped, politely waiting. He held up a bottle half full of some bright sports drink and without a word tilted it forward. The liquid splashed across her lap, soaking the gray fabric in a cold, sticky streak. There was a pause, a flicker of silence, then laughter broke out like a reflex. Someone lifted a phone. Another whispered loud enough to be heard. Claire looked down at the spreading stain, then slowly lifted her head. Her face didn't shift. No anger, no flinch, just stillness. The silence she held was sharper than any shout. She stepped aside, boots clicking quietly on the floor, and kept walking. The laughter followed her for a few seconds, then faded as the cadets turned back to their jokes. To them, it was just another moment of harmless fun. A nobody brushed aside. The stain dried by midday, but never really faded. The blue color bled into the threads visible even after washing. Over time, it became something more. A mark. A label. A quiet reminder to everyone who saw it that she didn't belong. But Claire never replaced the uniform. She wore it each day like nothing happened. Not to make a point. Not to prove anything. Just because she didn't see the need to hide what they had done. The others saw weakness. But there was something about her stillness that unsettled even the boldest ones. Like she was carrying a weight they couldn't understand. Like she didn't react because she already knew who she was and who they weren't. No one poured anything on her again. They didn't have to. The message had landed. What they never expected was that she had heard it, remembered it, and turned it into armor. Quiet, durable, unshakable. The memo arrived without a signature. Just a few cold lines on a digital screen stating that Claire's civilian classification didn't meet simulation clearance. From that moment on, every simulator door stayed locked to her badge. She could clean around them, inventory the equipment inside them, but she couldn't step into the training zones themselves. Her new assignments came through logistics. Pallet checks, gear inspections, resupply schedules. She moved between hangars with a scanner clipped to her belt and a clipboard tucked under one arm. If she passed a group of cadets, no one said anything. At best, they ignored her. At worst, they talked like she wasn't there. Behind the tinted windows of the control room, she watched. Inside, trainees struggled with storm simulations, emergency protocols, mid-air correction drills. Instructors paced and barked commands. Nobody noticed the woman just outside the glass. Nobody thought she might understand every maneuver better than the ones shouting about it. She stood there for hours, some days, just standing, arms crossed, eyes locked on the displays. When a cadet overcompensated on a rudder shift and spiraled into a simulated crash, she blinked once. When another forgot a pre-flight lock check, she quietly noted the sequence on her clipboard margin. In the cafeteria, she kept her same corner spot. Her tray always had the same layout. Protein, rehydrated greens, a steel water bottle she rarely touched. Voices buzzed around her, but not to her. Sometimes they made jokes just loud enough to sting. Supply Barbie. Civilian shadow. Pretty sure she thinks she's undercover. She never looked up. She never laughed. She never left early. She stayed until the room thinned, then cleared, then returned to her list like nothing had been said. The distance grew each day, between what they thought she was and what she actually knew. But Claire didn't bridge the gap. She let it stretch, let it grow, because the wider it became, the more invisible she became, and the more invisible she was, the more she could see. She started to memorize more than schedules. She watched how the flight instructors skipped protocols when no ranking officer was present. She marked how the night crew handled fuel inconsistencies. She tracked what got logged and what didn't. No one asked what she was doing. No one checked her notes. They saw a silent woman with a clipboard and assumed she was bored. They never realized she was building a map, not just of the base, but of everyone inside it. Every night after the lights dimmed and the hangars emptied, Claire walked the long path to the edge of the maintenance bay. It was always quiet there, just the hum of cooling systems and the slow tick of metal settling under the desert air. She sat cross-legged behind a service console back against the wall with a small leather-bound notebook resting on her knee. There were no electronics, no data sync. Every entry was written by hand, pages filled with aircraft schematics, fuel flow ratios, override codes, error patterns, and flight simulations. What she couldn't write during the day she memorized: altitude drift, lag in hydraulic response, mistimed pilot inputs during recovery drills. She stored them in her mind like coordinates, then emptied them onto paper in the stillness of night. Not as a record, as a system. Her meals went untouched beside her, wrapped in plastic always the same. She only reached for water. Her hands moved with quiet rhythm, flipping between pages, cross-referencing earlier notes, marking trends with a narrow stroke of pencil. It wasn't cluttered. It was precise, clean, intentional. In her quarters at the far end of the personnel wing, nothing was out of place. Her bed was always made hospital corners tight. Her locker contained just 2 sets of uniforms, a folded blanket, and a laminated map of the base taped inside the door. Highlighter lines crisscrossed the layout, connecting maintenance tunnels, fuel lines, and secondary control access points. She updated the map each night, not because she was lost, because she wanted to know every way through, every possible angle, every overlooked weakness, not to break the system, to understand it completely. Nobody ever asked what she wrote. Nobody even knew the notebook existed. They thought she walked through Redridge like a ghost. They didn't realize ghosts listen. They didn't realize she was charting everything, piece by piece. She marked cadet names, which ones skipped checks, which instructors cut corners. She drew diagrams of faulty pressure seals, noted how long it took for each repair request to go through. She recorded how many seconds it took for base lockdown to respond to false triggers. To anyone else, it would have looked obsessive. But Claire wasn't obsessed. She was preparing, quietly, strategically, because someday something would break. And when it did, she wanted to know exactly where to stand when it happened. Claire had flown into storms that bent steel and rattled bones. She had landed under fire, made decisions with seconds to spare, and watched people she trusted vanish in clouds of flame. Her name once carried weight behind sealed doors, passed quietly between commanders with nods and encrypted orders. But then came the mission they never spoke about, the one where things went wrong not because of her, but because someone else thought shortcuts were faster than checklists. She walked away with her aircraft intact and her team scattered across 3 countries. 2 never made it home. 1 never woke up. After that, she didn't want the wings anymore. Not the medals, not the ceremony, not the standing ovations after impossible landings. The silence that followed their names felt louder than the applause, and she couldn't keep flying like nothing had been lost. So, she asked for clearance to be scrubbed. She filed under civilian support. She traded call signs for code numbers and her title for a storage key card. Nobody questioned it. She had earned the right to disappear. The quiet felt cleaner. No one expecting speeches, no one watching for cracks. She could study everything without being the focus, could work without the weight of reputation. What looked like retreat was actually something else. It was the choice to rebuild. That stain on her uniform, the one from the drink, she never tried to erase it. People thought she was too poor to buy a new set, that she didn't care. But the truth was simpler. It was a marker, a boundary line between who they saw and who she really was. The longer she stayed silent, the more powerful it became. Silence let her listen better, see deeper, move unnoticed. Not to hide, but to understand. The cadets couldn't figure her out because they weren't trained to read stillness. They only recognized noise. She didn't need to prove anything anymore, not with reports, not with credentials. Every night while the others chased rankings and simulator scores, she committed data to memory, not to impress, to prepare. She had known loss, not just of people, but of identity. The uniform she wore now didn't weigh nearly as much as the one she gave up. This one didn't carry expectation. It gave her space to think. Instructors walked by her without a word. Officers assumed she was misplaced. No one guessed she could fly circles around every single one of them. She didn't correct them. That wasn't the point. Her silence wasn't a wall. It was a compass. There was no revenge in her, no bitterness, just precision. She did what needed to be done, and she did it right even if no one watched. Especially if no one watched. The world had taught her that speaking up didn't always change things. But being ready could. Readiness, after all, didn't need an audience. It just needed timing. And Claire Dawson understood timing better than anyone. The first alarm sounded like a heartbeat. Slow, heavy, dull enough that no one reacted right away. Then it rose, pulsing red light across every corridor like blood through the walls. Inside the operations room, officers scrambled. Voices cracked through intercoms. Something was wrong with the pre-flight scan on the C-130 transport. Something about contamination. Then came the stretcher. One of the pilots collapsed near the cargo ramp. His hands twitched, eyes unfocused. The medics moved fast, but not fast enough to calm the room. Moments later, the second pilot went down the same way. Radiation exposure. A scanner malfunctioned during morning checks. Isolated, not fatal, but enough to ground them completely. 2 pilots out. No replacements on base. The cargo wasn't standard. 2 M1 tanks loaded and locked in the rear hold. The transport window was narrow. Dust storms moving in from the southeast. Radar coverage dropping by the hour. If they missed the launch window, the forward unit in the southern range would be cut off. No armor, no airlift, no support. The countdown started at 41 minutes. That number dropped fast. Backup pilots were 4 hours away, still grounded at Mountain View Air Command. Commanders snapped between radio channels. Tech teams reported hydraulic delays. Fuel loading was still underway. Wind speeds doubled. Brandon stood in the back with his arms folded. He was the highest-ranked cadet in the hangar. All eyes drifted toward him. A commander asked if he could fly it. 15 hours of simulator time, he answered. Never with combat payload, never in these conditions. He shook his head. He didn't even hesitate. It's suicide, he said. The silence after that landed hard. No one else moved. No hands raised. No volunteers stepped forward. Everyone knew what that meant. The transport would stay grounded, and soldiers would die. Inside the command center, someone knocked over a coffee mug. The liquid spread across a tray of backup schematics. Alarms kept pulsing, red lights flashing over rows of unread monitors. The storm outside hit the fence line. Wind pressed against metal siding like it wanted in. A technician ran diagnostics. The cargo balance was already slipping out of tolerance. Pressure drift on the rear bay, electrical instability across one of the power relays. All fixable, but not without time. And time was gone. They had 27 minutes left, then 23, then 19. Officers shouted across the room. Voices blurred. Every idea was either too slow or too dangerous. Every name thrown out was unqualified. Someone called again for volunteers. Nobody moved, not even the instructors. None were certified for this configuration. Not in this weather. Not with this weight. Claire watched it all from the edge of the room. She hadn't spoken. No one had noticed her there. She leaned near the equipment rack's, eyes scanning the large mission display. Her hands stayed still, her face unreadable. The commander stepped back from the briefing table and looked around the room. "We're out of time," he said. His voice was quiet now. Flat. "We either abandon the cargo or we lose them." And for a moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of storm winds against the glass and the low whine of a failing decision. The weight of hesitation pressing down on everyone in the room. A mission ready, a team waiting, and no one left to carry it forward. Claire stepped forward like she was walking into a breeze. No panic, no urgency. Just calm steps toward the center of the room. Her voice didn't rise above the storm of chatter. She didn't have to. 4 words slipped through the noise and dropped into silence. "I can fly it." At first no one responded. Then came the laugh. Sharp, disbelieving. One cadet leaned against a table and shook his head. Another smirked and muttered something about delusions. Claire didn't blink. Her eyes stayed on the mission screen. She spoke again, this time with detail. Section 19, Delta. Rear cargo seal failure. Sway load risk above 250 knots. Manual ballast correction with cross distribution. And if not adjusted during climb, the aircraft would lose lift by the second waypoint. A technician near the diagnostics terminal froze. Fingers moved across the keyboard. Data rolled down the screen. His voice came out low and clipped. "She's right. Every number matches." The laughter stopped. The room tilted. Eyes turned toward her like they hadn't seen her before. The base commander looked stunned. He asked who she was. Her reply was steady. "Claire Dawson. Level 9 Combat Transport Certification. Black Ops clearance under Directive Delta 7. You could feel the air shift. Not loud, not dramatic. Just gravity returning. Orders slowed. Words hung. The commander gave a single nod. "You have 12 minutes," he said. Claire walked out without waiting. Toward the C-130 crouched in the hangar. Rain tapped the roof. Winds howled. But inside the cargo bay she moved like it was familiar. Pre-check by hand. No co-pilot. No support. She climbed into the cockpit and ran diagnostics herself. Adjusted trim manually. Rebalanced cargo pressure and adjusted flight deck tension. The crew on the ground didn't touch a thing. They just watched. She wore her gray uniform under the pressure vest. Same boots, same stain on the knee. But now every person outside saw something else entirely. Not a clerk, not a mistake. A pilot. The engines roared to life. The aircraft rolled onto the runway. Winds slammed from the side. The storm was close now, too close, but she didn't hesitate. At 160 knots, she pulled. The nose lifted. The transport groaned under weight and wind. Then it rose, higher, steady, clean. She vanished into the clouds, and the base for once said nothing at all. The storm swallowed everything outside the cockpit. Visibility dropped to near zero. Winds slammed the wings with unpredictable force. Claire adjusted trim, recalibrated thrust and pushed through each wave of turbulence with quiet control. Her eyes stayed locked on the instruments, her hands steady through every vibration of the frame. The C-130 didn't glide. It fought. But she understood that kind of flight. Heavy, relentless, real. The tanks stayed secure in the hold, each one tied down with the adjustments she made in minutes. She monitored fuel flow, recalculated ascent rates, and shaved seconds where she could afford them. Radar flickered. Communications dropped out halfway through the route. But she knew the landscape. She had flown over it before in different skies with different call signs. At waypoint 4, she dropped to low altitude, cutting below the worst of the wind. The storm raged around her, but she cut through it clean. The drop zone came into view just over 34 minutes after wheels up. The landing wasn't smooth, but it was solid. No skids, no errors. The rear ramp lowered and soldiers rushed to unload the armor. She stayed in the cockpit just long enough to confirm the secure transfer. No applause, no cheers, just nods from the ground team and a go-ahead to return. The trip back was quieter. The wind had shifted. Storm pressure dropped just enough to give her smoother air. As the base came into view, she adjusted final approach without needing guidance. She touched down exactly within range. No bounce, no drag. When the engines powered off, she sat for a moment. Hands on the controls. The silence inside the cockpit felt heavier than anything she had flown through. She unbuckled, stood up, and walked the length of the aircraft alone. The hangar doors were open. Wind blew dust across the tarmac, and standing there in rows and lines without command were the people who had spent days pretending she didn't exist. The commander stood at the front cap under his arm. His posture was exact, his expression unreadable. As she stepped down onto the concrete, he raised his hand in salute. Not ceremony, not performance. Something closer to regret. He said nothing at first, just held the salute. Then he lowered it and looked her in the eye. "We misjudged you," he said. His voice didn't carry apology. It carried recognition. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. Behind him, Brandon Keller shifted in place. The confident smirk was gone. His jaw was tight. He stepped forward with hesitation, not pride. His voice caught somewhere between shame and sincerity. He told her he was sorry, that he hadn't known, that none of them had. Claire looked at him for a second, then walked past him without slowing. Not cruel, not dismissive, just complete. As she moved down the line, the cadets straightened. One by one, shoulders squared, eyes forward. No one had to tell them to do it. They did it because she had earned it, and because they knew they had missed something important. She reached the edge of the formation. Someone asked if she would stay, if she would lead the program. Claire paused, looked out at the storm still dying in the distance, then back at the line of faces. "I was never supposed to be here long," she said, "but maybe next time someone like me shows up, they won't have to be invisible first." She turned and walked into the dust. Her boots made no sound over the wind. No one followed, not because they didn't want to, because they knew they didn't have the right. The formation stayed in place even after she was gone, not for orders, for memory, for change. And somewhere deep inside that base, under revised protocols and rewritten flight logs, the lesson remained. Real power doesn't shout. Sometimes it waits in silence, and when it moves everything.